April 5th, 2026, the port of Novorossiysk, 2 a.m., and then the sky explodes. More than 50 unmanned drones cut through the darkness, tearing apart the air defenses of what was once Russia's most powerful naval force in the Black Sea. Anti-aircraft missiles scream upward, searchlights slash the night, guns pour fire into the air. None of it is enough. The frigate Admiral Makarov, the last true flagship of Russia's Black Sea fleet, takes a direct hit. Hours later, the railway ferry Slavyanin, the final active logistics link between mainland Russia and Crimea, through the Kerch Strait, catches fire and sinks into the dark water. And an oil drilling platform off the Crimean coast, the Sivash, is struck in the same night. 3 strategic targets, 1 night, 0 Ukrainian warships involved. This is not a scene from a war movie. This is what modern naval warfare looks like when one side refuses to play by the old rules. Welcome to the War Bill. And this is the story of how Ukraine, a country with no navy, dismantled one of the world's most storied naval fleets and turned its last safe harbor into a killing ground. To understand why Russia's Black Sea fleet collapsed so completely and so fast, you need to go back to April 2022 and understand what Moscow actually believed going into this war. The vision was straightforward and in Russian strategic circles considered virtually guaranteed. More than 70 warships, frigates, and caliber-armed corvettes would dominate the Black Sea. The sea itself would become a Russian lake. Ukraine would be strangled, cut off from the grain export routes that generate billions of dollars annually. And the world would see what Russian naval power looked like when it was fully unleashed. That was the plan. On April 13th, 2022, reality sent a very different message. The Moskva flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, a Slava-class cruiser 186 meters of steel, displacing 12,000 tons, was struck by 2 Neptune anti-ship missiles. Ukrainian-built, domestically developed, fired from a country that by every conventional metric had no business threatening a warship of that size. The next day, the Moskva sank. The shock wasn't just about the physical loss, as devastating as that was. The shock was about what it meant. A country with no navy had just sent Russia's most powerful surface combatant to the bottom of the sea. The myth of Russian naval invincibility, the story Moscow had been telling itself and the world for decades, cracked down the middle. And from that crack, everything else began to fall. After the Moskva, Ukraine didn't pause, but they also understood a hard truth: Neptune missiles were scarce. To sustain pressure on a fleet that still massively outnumbered anything Ukraine could field conventionally, they needed something different. Something cheaper, something that could be built faster than it could be destroyed. The answer came out of Ukrainian engineering workshops that most of the world didn't know existed. Not a warship, not a missile battery, a drone that rides the waves. The Magura 5.5 changed everything. 5.5 meters long, under a ton in weight, capable of carrying 320 kilograms of explosives, top speed between 40 and 50 knots, an operational range of 800 kilometers on a single run, and most critically, it flies so close to the surface of the water that it is functionally invisible to conventional radar systems. The radar cross-section is minimal. By the time most Russian defense systems detected it, the drone was already inside the engagement window. Ukraine didn't stop there. The Sea Baby unmanned surface vehicle emerged alongside the Magura, a larger, heavier-hitting platform capable of packing more than 1,000 kilograms of explosives. Where Magura was precise and fast, Sea Baby was a hammer. Used together, they shattered every defensive calculation the Russian Navy had built over decades. The results came quickly and brutally. February 2024, a swarm of Magura drones strikes and sinks the Tarantul-class corvette Ivanovets in Sevastopol Harbor. March 2024, the patrol ship Sergei Kotov, valued at approximately $65 million, meets the same end. Sea Baby drones assault the port of Sevastopol, directly inflicting heavy damage on a landing ship. Meanwhile, Ukrainian engineers were repurposing Cold War-era S-200 air defense missiles as improvised surface attack weapons and targeting Russian infrastructure across Crimea. British supplied Storm Shadow cruise missiles and American provided ATA-CMS ballistic missiles continued their methodical campaign against Russian naval facilities on the peninsula. Then came the FP-1, Ukraine's long-range strike drone with a reported operational range of 1,600 kilometers. In August 2025, an FPV drone struck a Bayan M corvette, a caliber-armed vessel in open water from 350 kilometers away. It was a first in modern naval warfare, an unmanned unmanned aerial vehicle destroying a warship in the open sea at that range. By April 2026, the tally was damning. Ukraine had sunk or severely damaged between 29 and 33 Russian warships and support vessels since the start of the full-scale invasion. That figure includes 2 submarines. Russia's response: they ran. After Sevastopol became untenable, Moscow made what seemed like a logical decision: relocate the bulk of the fleet eastward to the port of Novorossiysk. The strategic logic was clear. Novorossiysk sits 200 to 350 nautical miles from Ukrainian-controlled territory. That distance in Moscow's calculation would place the fleet beyond the effective reach of Ukrainian unmanned systems. Protected by natural geography, reinforced breakwaters, and distance alone, the fleet would be safe. That was Moscow's assumption in 2023, but Ukrainian engineers don't stand still. Every month through 2024 and into 2025, the operational range of Ukraine's naval and aerial drone systems extended further. The invisible wall of safety that Moscow imagined around Novorossiysk shrank week by week, mile by mile, and at some point no one can say exactly when the breakwaters that were supposed to protect the fleet stopped being a shield. They became the bars of a cage. Naval News analysis from April 2026 described the situation with a precision that left no room for ambiguity. Remaining in port exposed the fleet to air attack, while sailing out into open water left ships defenseless against naval drones. Russia had built itself into a corner with no exit, and there were no alternative ports to escape to. Sochi lacked the infrastructure to support large-scale fleet operations. Ochimchira near the Georgian border was too small and too limited. Withdrawing through the Volga-Don Canal into the Caspian Sea would have meant permanent exile, a fleet removed from the war entirely with no way back. The Black Sea Fleet had trapped itself, not through a single catastrophic decision, but through the slow accumulation of strategic miscalculations, technological arrogance, and an absolute failure to anticipate what an adversary fighting for survival could accomplish when given time and resources to innovate. And the trap kept tightening. Back to the night of April 5th, 2026. As more than 50 Ukrainian drones approached Novorossiysk across the Black Sea, one target stood above the rest: the Admiral Makarov. This was no ordinary frigate. After the Moskva went down in 2022, the Makarov effectively became the operational flagship of the Black Sea Fleet. It carried Kaliber cruise missiles, weapons with a range of up to 2,500 kilometers, capable of striking virtually any target on Ukrainian territory. When launched from Novorossiysk, the Admiral Makarov was by April 2026 the last operationally capable warship in the Black Sea that could fire Kaliber missiles. Footage released by Colonel Robert Magyar Brovdy, commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, showed the anatomy of the attack in real time. The Makarov's air defense systems fired continuously. Searchlights swept the water. Anti-aircraft guns lit up the sky in every direction. It wasn't enough. The drones reached their target. Magyar Brovdy described the strike as effective fire and stated that damage assessment was being conducted by Ukrainian intelligence. With the ship already carrying prior damage and now struck again while anchored in port, its operational capacity was assessed to be near zero. Simultaneously, hundreds of kilometers to the east at the Kerch Strait, special operations personnel affiliated with Ukraine's military intelligence agency HUR disabled the Russian railway ferry Slavyanin in a coordinated drone attack. HUR confirmed it as the last active Russian railway ferry operating through the Kerch Strait, the final functioning logistical link of that type connecting mainland Russia to Crimea. The ship was seen burning through the night, and before dawn, a third target, the Savash drilling platform off the Crimean coast, a node in Russia's energy and logistics infrastructure in the region, was struck. 3 strategic targets, one coordinated operation executed by a country with no conventional navy. To fully understand this collapse, we need to move beyond individual battles and look at the structural and doctrinal failures that made it inevitable. These weren't tactical errors, they were systemic rot. Failure 1. The entire defensive architecture was built for the wrong enemy. Russia's naval defense systems were designed to counter conventional threats. Other warships' high-altitude missiles established aerial attack vectors. Radar systems were optimized for large targets moving in predictable ways. Ukraine's surface drones, small, low, fast, with minimal radar cross-section, were essentially ghosts to those systems. In multiple documented engagements, Russian defenses didn't detect incoming drones until they were already within striking distance. By then, interception was nearly impossible. failure to strategic space was sealed shut. The Montreux Convention, enforced by Turkey, closed the Bosphorus and Dardanelles straits to warships of belligerent nations from the outset of the conflict. This meant Russia could not bring replacement vessels into the Black Sea to offset losses. Every ship sunk was a permanent, irreplaceable loss. The Black Sea, once an asset, became a sealed box, a theater with no reinforcements. Failure 3. The repair crisis became a death sentence. For the same reason the fleet couldn't be reinforced, damaged ships couldn't leave for proper repairs. The shipyard capacity at Novorossiysk was severely limited. Spare parts were increasingly scarce due to international sanctions strangling Russia's defense industrial supply chains. The result, every hit became permanent. Ships sat rotting in harbor waiting for repairs that were months or years away, and in some cases were struck again before those repairs could begin. Failure 4. Command and control was breaking down. Reports, including from Russian military bloggers who have no incentive to exaggerate Russian failures, indicated that Fleet Commander Admiral Sergei Pinchuk was under serious pressure over systematic operational failures. Early warning systems were underperforming. Response forces were reacting too slowly. Coordination between units was weak. According to multiple accounts, the delay between alarm and actual intervention was running 20 to 40 minutes. For a drone traveling at 40 knots, 20 minutes is more than enough time to reach any target in Novorossiysk harbor. Layered beneath all of this was the deepest failure of all strategic blindness. Moscow was slow, catastrophically slow, to recognize the threat posed by unmanned naval systems. While Ukraine was developing, testing, and deploying these weapons at scale, Russia's navy continued to operate on the assumption that big ships and conventional doctrine would carry the day. By the time Russian defense planners began taking the drone threat seriously, Ukraine was already generations ahead. Here is the number that defines this entire campaign. Each Ukrainian naval drone strike costs somewhere between a few $100,000, in some cases considerably less. Each Russian warship lost represents tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, not counting the irreplaceable trained crews, the lost combat capability, and the strategic position that disappears with the vessel. The Makarov, hundreds of millions of dollars. The Moskva before it, comparable. The Sergei Kotov, $65 million. And those are just the named ones. The fundamental asymmetry was captured precisely by Naval News in their April 2026 analysis. Russian sailors had to successfully intercept every single incoming threat. Ukraine only needed to succeed once. No defensive system in the world can permanently tip that equation in Russia's favor when the attacker can manufacture drones faster than the defender can replace ships. On April 3rd, 2026, this reality extended into new waters. A Volgobalt-class dry cargo ship sailing through the Sea of Azov, a body of water that had been considered relatively safe up to that point, was struck and sunk by a Ukrainian drone attack. The Sea of Azov. Considered safe. No longer. Every coastline, every port, every vessel, and every corner of the Black Sea is now inside Ukraine's operational envelope. There are no more safe zones. What has happened in the Black Sea is not a regional story. It is a blueprint for the future of naval warfare, and every major military power on Earth is studying it. For Ukraine, the gains are concrete and enormous. Effective control of the Western Black Sea has shifted. The port of Odessa is operating again. Grain exports have recovered toward pre-war levels, restoring a critical economic lifeline worth billions of dollars annually. Logistical supply to Crimea has been strangled from multiple directions. Ferries struck the Kerch Bridge, repeatedly targeted by cruise missiles and drones, forcing Russia to dedicate large portions of its air defense capacity just to protect the bridge and leaving other fronts exposed. Caliber missile strikes on Ukrainian cities have dropped to once or twice a month. A Carnegie Endowment analysis from April 2026 concluded that Ukraine's asymmetric naval campaign had rendered the Russian Black Sea Fleet functionally neutralized. For Russia, the losses compound across three dimensions. Militarily, a fleet that once threatened NATO's southern flank and projected power into the Mediterranean is now hiding behind harbor walls. Economically, Novorossiysk is not just a naval base, it houses Russia's largest oil export terminal. Repeated attacks in the vicinity are driving up costs and driving away commercial shipping. War risk insurance premiums for Black Sea routes have surged. Some tanker companies are reducing or eliminating voyages in the region entirely. Politically, the narrative of an invincible Russian military, the foundational story of Putin's domestic legitimacy, has been visibly publicly shattered. shattered. A country without a navy expelled Russia from a sea Moscow claimed as its own. For the United States and NATO, the Black Sea is forcing a reckoning that powerful institutions are rarely comfortable having. In Washington, the debate that was once whispered is now being said out loud. Would an American carrier strike group surrounded by swarms of autonomous naval drones fare any better? The question has shifted from should we develop this technology to how quickly can we build defenses against it? Every major navy is scrambling to answer that second question before they're forced to answer it under fire. For China, the Black Sea is a laboratory. Beijing is watching the Ukrainian campaign with intense strategic interest as it develops its own doctrine for the South China Sea. The lesson Chinese military planners are drawing is being written into their operational frameworks. In real time, large surface vessels are vulnerable to small autonomous expendable weapons in ways that traditional naval doctrine never anticipated. For smaller nations, states that have long accepted the reality that they could never compete with naval superpowers, the implications are revolutionary. For the cost of a single destroyer, you can manufacture hundreds of naval drones. Production timelines are measured in months, not decades. The barrier to credible naval deterrence has dropped by an order of magnitude. Ukraine has done something that no theorist fully predicted and no superpower anticipated. It has democratized naval warfare. Today, what remains of Russia's Black Sea fleet sits in Novorossiysk, anchored and waiting. The officers aboard those ships understand their situation with perfect clarity. Sailing out into open water means running toward drones that are already waiting. Staying in port means waiting for the next strike to find them where they sit. Ukraine's systems are extending their range every month. The last remaining footholds along Russia's Black Sea coast, each one are moving steadily within reach. Stay in port and wait to die. Put to sea and run toward it. The Black Sea fleet was supposed to be the instrument of Russian power projection in the Mediterranean, supporting the Tartus base in Syria, threatening NATO's southern flank, signaling Russian resolve to the world. That fleet is now a cautionary tale. The image Putin built around it lies at the bottom of the Black Sea alongside the wreckage. Even if Russia attempts to rebuild a project that faces nearly insurmountable obstacles between sanctioned shipyard capacity limitations and the technology gap created by years of international isolation, they will have to do so in a world that has already moved on. The era of the great warship as the cornerstone of naval power is ending, not because warships became obsolete overnight, but because a nation fighting for its survival with ingenuity and time and international support proved that they can be beaten by something that costs a fraction of a percent of their value. The era of the drone has begun, and the country that wrote the first chapter of this era had no navy at all. This is the War Bill, where we analyze modern conflict not through headlines, but through the strategic reality underneath them. If this analysis gave you a perspective you couldn't find elsewhere, subscribe and hit the bell. Tell us in the comments, what does the future of the Black Sea look like from here? And what does this mean for the next naval conflict wherever it happens?